Welcome to another episode of On This Day on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. I'm your host, Mike Goodpaster, and today we're going to talk about December the 10th, 1995, when the Toronto Raptors beat the Vancouver Grizzlies in the first matchup between the two NBA expansion teams. Now, it's kind of a nondescript game, except for the first time two Canadian teams played in an NBA Finals. So today we're going to look at the Vancouver Grizzlies and the Toronto Raptors and how they got into the NBA. Of course, the Raptors, after more than 20 years, won Canada's first ever NBA World Championship last season. So today we're going to look back at 1995 and a little bit before that even, and how Vancouver and Toronto ended up in the NBA on this day. All right, the Vancouver Grizzlies joined the NBA for the 1995-96 season along with the Toronto Raptors as part of the league's two-pronged expansion into Canada. Vancouver and Toronto became the first non-U.S. cities to join the league since 1946-47 when the Toronto Huskies were one-year members of the NBA's forerunner, the Basketball Association of America. After being officially accepted into the fold by the NBA's Board of Governors on April 27, 1994, Vancouver became the league's 29th franchise. The suddenness of the acceptance came as a shock to the Vancouver sporting public. The last time there had been any talk of an NBA franchise coming to Canada's West Coast was in the early 1980s, when local entrepreneur Nelson Scalbania mounted an unsuccessful bid to lure the league north of the border. A decade later, in late February 1993, local sports magnate Arthur Griffiths revealed that he was attempting to secure an NBA franchise for the city. Upon learning that the league had reformed its expansion committee to debate the merits of an interested group from Toronto, Griffiths decided that Vancouver had enough merits on its own that it could sell the league on a two-city expansion. Griffiths' company, Northwest Sports Enterprises, was a majority owner in NHL's Vancouver Canucks, and Griffiths had already plans to construct a privately funded 20,000-seat arena in the city's downtown. The plans called for the arena to be completed in time for both the 1995-96 hockey and basketball seasons, according perfectly with the NBA's expansion hopes. The Grizzlies' ownership, then known simply as the Vancouver Basketball Partnership, traveled to Minneapolis during All-Star Weekend, and on Valentine's Day in 1994 received preliminary franchise approval from the league's expansion committee. That move paved the way for full approval from the NBA during its Board of Governors meetings in New York on April 27, 1994. The franchise fee for both Vancouver and Toronto was set at $125 million apiece, far more than the $32.5 million the last four expansion teams had paid during the four-team, two-phase expansion of 1988 and 1989. The franchise agreements signed by both Vancouver and Toronto contained a number of conditions that had to be met before full approval could be granted. One condition in particular threatened to rob both cities of their teams well in advance of the projected 1995 November tip-offs. To preserve the integrity of the NBA game, Commissioner David J. Stern required the provinces of British Columbia and Ontario to abolish any wagering on the league's games prior to the 1995-96 season. In British Columbia, that meant removing NBA contests from the provincial government, controlled sports action betting games, in which players who correctly predicted the point spreads of at least three NBA games won cash prizes. In 1993, BC bettors shelled out some $1.56 million Canadian dollars on NBA games, with a large portion of that money dedicated to healthcare services in the province. Public opposition to the league's stance was fierce in both provinces. How could a professional sports league dictate policy to foreign governments, especially when the lotteries did so much to ensure a high level of healthcare in Canada? In the end, BC Premier Michael Harcourt, himself a BC high school basketball player of some renown in the 1950s, worked together with Griffiths and the NBA to achieve a final resolution. On February 9, 1994, just prior to their trip to Minneapolis, Griffiths Group agreed to contribute $500,000 per year for 5 years beginning in 1995. Half of the proceeds were donated to a hospice for needy children, and the other half to the BC healthcare system, in exchange for having all NBA games removed from sports action. The argument Griffiths successfully made to Harcourt was that a total of $10 million in taxes would be generated each year by the Vancouver NBA franchise, to the benefit of both the provincial and federal governments. On July 22, 1994, the Vancouver NBA group, still working without a team name, hired Stu Jackson as the team's first general manager and vice president of basketball operations. Jackson had been the head coach for the Knicks in 1989-90 and part of the 1990-91 season. He was lured away from his spot at head coach at the University of Wisconsin to take on the challenge of building an NBA club in Vancouver. For 5 months, the team had been operating without any employee holding prior any NBA experience. Griffiths was drawn to Jackson because of the rave reviews Jackson had received from both Stern and NBA Deputy Commissioner Russ Granick. Jackson worked with both men while he was employed in the league's front office following his stint as the Knicks coach. Jackson immediately hired a scouting department headed by former Milwaukee Bucks assistant coach Larry Riley, and the four-man team made plans to evaluate the talent pool that would become available in both the expansion and college drafts in late June of 1995. On August 11, 1994, the Vancouver Basketball Partnership officially became the Vancouver Grizzlies. During ceremonies held amid totem poles at the University of British Columbia's Museum of Anthropology, Jackson and Griffiths announced the name and revealed the team logo of the fierce animal indigenous to Canada's westernmost province. Primary colors were turquoise, brown, bronze, and red. Another of the NBA's more difficult stipulations for full franchise approval was for both Vancouver and Toronto to have secured 50% payment on 12,500 season tickets by January the 1st of 1995. Orlando and Minnesota, markets with a much greater knowledge and appreciation of NBA basketball, had struggled to reach sales of 10,000 tickets prior to their team's debut in fall 1989. In hockey-crazed Vancouver, even the National Hockey League's Canucks had a ticket base smaller than 12,500 season ticket holders. Sales had reached about 10,000 with 10 days remaining, but on December 21st, 1994, the team announced that the nationwide pharmaceutical chain Shoppers Drug Market had purchased 2,500 sets of season tickets, pushing the Grizzlies past the magic number to 12,624. Shoppers Drug Mart also helped the Toronto Raptors in a similar fashion. On March 7, 1995, Griffiths announced that he had surrendered majority of control of the Grizzlies, the Canucks, and General Motors Place to Seattle's John McCall Jr. McCall was a minority shareholder whose family had made its fortune through McCall Cellular, a wireless communications giant that had recently completed a multi-million-dollar merger with AT&T. On June 19, 1995, Jackson ended months of speculation by introducing Brian Winters as the Vancouver Grizzlies' first coach. The 43-year-old Winters had spent the last 9 seasons, 2 with the Atlanta Hawks and 7 with the Cleveland Cavaliers, an assistant under the legendary coach Lenny Wilkens, the winningest head coach in league history. A first-round draft pick of the Lakers in 1974, Winters was named to the NBA All-Rookie team after his first year. The following season, he was dealt to the Milwaukee Bucks along with Junior Bridgman, Dave Myers, and Elmore Smith for the most prolific scorer in league history, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That trade didn't work out too good for him. But Winters went on to finish his career with the Bucks and is one of 7 players who have had their jersey retired by the team. He averaged over 16 points a game during an NBA career, which ended after the 1982-83 season. Just 5 days after Winters' hiring, the Grizzlies and the Raptors selected the nucleus of their inaugural teams during the NBA expansion draft. Each of the existing 27 NBA teams were allowed to protect a maximum of 8 players and could only give up 1. The draft would end when 1 player had been chosen from each team. After a coin toss, Vancouver elected to take the better pick in the upcoming college draft, 6th overall to Toronto's 7th, thus allowing the Raptors the top pick in the expansion draft. After Toronto selected Chicago point guard B.J. Armstrong with the first pick, Vancouver answered by selecting New York Knicks point guard Greg Anthony. Among the top players selected by the Grizzlies during the expansion draft were Indiana Pacers guard Byron Scott, Cleveland Cavaliers guard Gerald Wilkins, Utah swingman Blue Edwards. Other NBA veterans included Charlotte Hornets forward Kenny Gatson, New Jersey Nets center Benoit Benjamin, one of the biggest busts in NBA history, and Washington Bullets forward Larry Stewart. Vancouver also selected Rodney Dent from the Orlando Magic, Antonio Harvey from the LA Lakers, Reggie Slater from the Nuggets, Trevor Ruffin from the Suns, Derek Phelps from the Sacramento Kings, and Doug Edwards from the Atlanta Hawks. Prior to the expansion draft, Vancouver had signed free agent point guard Kevin Pritchard, formerly of the Miami Heat, as its first ever player. At the 1995 NBA draft held in Toronto's Sky Dome on June 28th, the Grizzlies tabbed Oklahoma State 7-foot, 292-pound center Bryant Big Country Reeves as their first ever college draft pick. They screwed up there. Reeves was the first true center selected and the sixth player taken overall. Jackson said he was delighted to get a player of Reeves' offensive capabilities and predicted that the young recruit would grow into one of the NBA's top centers. Looking for ways to sell interest in an untested NBA market, the Grizzlies also felt that Reeves was an especially solid citizen with the country charm to win over new fans. The Grizzlies were born. Now that brings us to the Toronto Raptors, who probably the highlight for the Toronto Raptors in their first season, which March 24th, 1996, the Raptors beat the eventual NBA World Champion Chicago Bulls by a score of 109-108. It was only one of 10 losses the Bulls would suffer that season. Michael Jordan attempted to win the game on the final shot, though the ball went in. It didn't count as the ball left his hands after the buzzer. Now, the legendary Magic Johnson played his only game against the Toronto Raptors in Toronto on March 31st, 1996, when Magic made his ill-conceived comeback. The Lakers won that game by a final score of 111-106. Now, probably the biggest issue, or the biggest news here was Damon Stoudemire. He had a noteworthy rookie season with the Toronto Raptors as he averaged a little over 9 assists and 19 points a game. He earned the nickname Mighty Mouse due to the fact he stands only 5'10", and that he had a Mighty Mouse tattoo on his right arm going into his rookie season. Damon currently holds the records of having the third highest assist average ever by a rookie and a rookie record setter for three-pointers with 133. The Raptors, on this day, December 10th, 1995, played the Vancouver Grizzlies for the first time in the history of the two teams. It was the first time that two Canadian teams had played each other in a professional basketball game, NBA-wise. And the game was held at General Motors Palace in Vancouver. The Raptors won the game. We're going to go ahead and wrap this show up, but I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about the 1995-96 expansion, Vancouver Grizzlies and Toronto Raptors. You can hear us every day on this day on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. So for Mike Goodpastor, which is me, you've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.